Good evening, listeners. Tonight we have a very special caller story sent in by one of our viewers. His name is Ma Young Wong, and what he is about to share is something he insists is completely true. It involves his uncle, a construction site in Seoul, and a man who may not have been entirely human. We are calling this one the Mysterious Sage.
Hey, thanks for taking my story. I need to start with a quick note before I get into it. The man at the center of this story has the last name Min, and throughout this account, I will refer to my uncle simply as A. Okay, here we go. So this all starts back in the mid-1990s, in Seoul, South Korea. My Uncle A gets a phone call one day from an older buddy of his. This guy was a construction site foreman, and at the time he was overseeing a bunch of apartment buildings going up in the Jamsil neighborhood. Now, for context, in Korea back then, it was standard for construction crews to get two things from their boss every day: work and a hot meal. That was just part of the deal. So this foreman calls my uncle and tells him something weird. He says a guy showed up at the site one day looking for work. And the first thing out of his mouth was, and I quote, "You do not need to feed me. Just give me work. And pay me cash instead of meals." The foreman thought that was the strangest thing he had ever heard. He told the guy to get lost. Who shows up to a hard labor job and says they do not need to eat? Now, the reason the foreman called my uncle specifically was because my uncle has always been deeply into Korean spiritual traditions. In Korea, we have something called musok. Think of it like a mix between shamanism and folk religion that goes back thousands of years. Shamans, spirit rituals, ancestor ceremonies, the idea that nature itself is full of living energy. My uncle was fascinated by all of that. Ever since he was young, he would tell my grandmother that once he finished his mandatory military service, he was going to go live in the mountains and study the old spiritual ways. She never took him seriously, but he meant every word of it. So when the foreman spotted someone who seemed out of the ordinary, he thought of my uncle right away. But here is where it gets genuinely strange. One day during lunch break, the foreman watched this mystery worker instead of eating. The guy climbed to the very top of a steel beam they had just erected. We are talking about a naked steel frame going straight up, maybe 30 to 40 feet in the air. And this man sat down cross-legged at the top, like he was meditating, and started chanting something under his breath. The foreman crept closer to try to hear it. And the moment he got within earshot, he felt something hit him out of nowhere. Tears. Just uncontrollable, heavy tears, streaming down his face. No reason, no sadness. Just this overwhelming wave of grief that came from nowhere. He said it felt like his soul was being wrung out. That was when he picked up the phone and called my uncle. My uncle was intrigued, but not shocked. He had heard stories like this before and figured it was probably some street-level shaman or an eccentric mystic. He said he would check it out eventually. But then a second call came in, and this time the foreman sounded genuinely rattled. He told my uncle, "You need to come down here right now. I am watching something I cannot explain." See, the building they were finishing up had a basement level. And construction basements in Korea are notoriously dusty. We are talking about thick cement powder, silica dust. The kind of air that you need a full respirator and a protective suit to breathe in safely. The whole crew was suiting up every morning just to do cleanup work down there. But this man, He worked right alongside everyone else in that basement. No mask, no suit, nothing. And when he walked back out, he was spotless. Not a single particle of dust on his clothes, his skin, or his eyebrows. Zero. While everyone else looked like they had been rolled in chalk. Then came the thing that really sent the foreman over the edge. They had a few hundred sheets of drywall stacked in the basement that needed to be hauled up to the third floor before the next day's work could begin. Moving that much material would normally require a full crew working early in the morning. But this man volunteered to do it alone, overnight, by himself. The foreman laughed at him and sent him home. There was no way one person could physically carry hundreds of heavy drywall sheets up 3 flights of stairs before sunrise. But when the foreman arrived at the site the next morning, every single sheet was already stacked neatly on the 3rd floor. Done. Perfectly organized. As if it had been handled by an entire crew working through the night. He called my uncle again and this time he said, "Get over here today. I am not kidding." My uncle drove to the site during the afternoon break, bringing some bread and milk as an offering. Just a polite gesture. He could already hear the chanting before he even got to the building. Something about it pulled him forward almost involuntarily. He waited at the base of the steel frame until the man came down. My uncle is not a small personality, by the way. He has a very strong presence, physically and spiritually. People who know him describe him as someone with a lot of inner fire. But the moment he sat down across from this man, he lost control of his bladder. Just like that, without warning. He sat down, and he lost it completely. He told me later it was not fear exactly. It was more like his entire nervous system just shut down in the presence of this man. Like his body recognized something his mind had not caught up to yet. When my uncle finally composed himself, he asked the man if he could read his fortune. Now, in Korean culture, fortune telling through a system called Saju is very common and widely respected. It is similar in some ways to Western astrology, but it is based on the exact year, month, day, and hour of a person's birth. A skilled practitioner can use those 4 pillars to map out the full arc of your life. But the man shook his head and said, "I am not a fortune teller. That is not what I do." My uncle pressed him, and after some back and forth, the man agreed to look at him. Here is the thing though. My uncle had not given him his birth date. He had not given his name. He had not said a single word about his family. But over the next several minutes, this man described things about my uncle's family history that no one outside the family had ever known. Secrets from his grandparents' generation. Things even my uncle had only heard fragments of. Things that had never been written down anywhere. My uncle said it was like watching someone read a book that should not exist. By the end of it, my uncle was in a completely different mental state. He asked the man right then and there to take him on as a student. In Korean spiritual tradition, the relationship between a master and a student is a very serious commitment. Think of it less like a college class and more like a monk joining a monastery. You are pledging your life to that path. But the man smiled and refused. He said, "You and I were friends in a past life. And we are still friends now. The bond between us is not teacher and student. It never has been. Let us just walk alongside each other." And that is how it began. Now I want to bring myself into the story, because I was there for some of this. This would have been around 1985. I was in maybe 3rd or 4th grade. My uncle ran a small coffee shop in a neighborhood called Obiondong. In Korea at that time, coffee shops, called dabang, were sort of like neighborhood gathering spots. People would come to talk, play cards, and pass the time. It was a totally normal business. One summer day, there was a massive rainstorm. I mean a historic storm. The kind where the Han River, one of the biggest rivers running through Seoul, was in danger of overflowing its banks. Cars could barely move. The streets were flooded. My parents were too busy with their own shop to take care of me, so they dropped me off at my uncle's coffee shop. The place was empty, no customers, just me, and eventually, him. The door opened, and in walked a man I had never seen before. Now, remember, it was pouring rain outside. Sheets of water, wind tearing through the streets. This man had no umbrella, and there was not a single drop of water on him. Not on his clothes, not on his hair, not on his face. He had walked through a monsoon and come out the other side like he had been standing in a dry room. But that was not the part that got me. It was his eyes. I was a little kid, and I remember locking eyes with him and just freezing. His irises were blue. Not a little blue. Bright, clear, sky blue. Like a Western European. But this man was Korean. Fully Korean. No contacts. No trick of the light. Just blue eyes on a Korean man standing in my uncle's coffee shop in the middle of a flood. If you have ever seen old paintings of Jesus in Western art, with that calm, otherworldly gaze, that is the closest thing I can compare it to. I know that might sound dramatic, but I was 8 years old and I am telling you exactly what I saw. He knew my uncle by name. They were on a first-name basis already. He greeted me warmly and said something about knowing my uncle well. His last name was Min. My uncle was in his mid-30s at the time, and Min was maybe 2 or 3 years older. He was from the southern coastal province of Hadong, in Gyeongnam. Think of it like the deep south of Korea. Very rural, very traditional, steeped in old ways. He sat down and within minutes he mentioned that my grandmother's knees were bothering her. My uncle had not told him anything about that. Min said, "I would like to come and fix them tomorrow. Let us go together." My uncle pointed out the window at the absolute downpour outside and said, "Min, are you serious? Look at this weather." Min just smiled and said, "Tomorrow will be fine. Trust me." The next morning, the storm had completely cleared. I mean completely. Bright sunshine, blue sky, like the previous night had never happened. Nobody had forecast that. Weather apps did not exist back then, and even the television meteorologists had been calling for rain for days. But Min had known. So the 4 of us headed out. Me, my uncle, my grandmother, and Min. My grandmother lived in a neighborhood called Wonjidong, near where the Hyundai and Kia corporate headquarters stand today. We took public transit. Now, at some point we had to cross a pedestrian overpass. In Korean cities, these are common. Elevated concrete bridges with staircases that go up and over busy roads. My uncle and I walked up the stairs normally, step by step. But Min walked up alongside us and his feet were not quite touching the steps. Not floating dramatically. Just hovering maybe half an inch above each stair. Moving in perfect rhythm, like he was on an escalator that nobody else could see. His legs moved. His body moved. His feet, did not make contact. My grandmother still talks about it today. She is in her 90s now and she still says, "That man was not human. Whatever he was not human." We eventually reached a small Buddhist hermitage partway up a mountain outside the city. Now, a hermitage in Korea is different from a full temple. Think of it as a retreat house, usually tucked into the mountains, where monks and spiritual practitioners go for deep, isolated study. Very quiet, very remote. A young novice monk, probably around my age, came out to greet us. Min asked if a certain person was available. The novice said yes and went inside. But before the novice had even made it through the door, we heard rapid footsteps. And out of a far room came an elderly man, maybe late 60s or early 70s, with a full white beard and white hair. Wearing traditional hemp robes, big framed, fast moving. He was running toward us. And he called out, "Master, you have come." This old man, who was older than my grandparents, was calling someone who looked to be in his mid-30s. "Master." And Min spoke back to him in informal speech, the way an elder would speak to a child. In Korean culture, using informal speech to someone significantly older than you is a very deliberate statement of rank. This old man dropped to his knees on the bare ground and bowed his head to the earth, over and over, pressing his forehead into the dirt, weeping, saying, "Why have you taken so long to return?" Quote. We were led inside, and I need to describe the scene because it was striking. Imagine a long low table running down the center of a dimly lit room, with several men seated along it in absolute silence. It had the energy of a meeting of important people. We later learned that these men were university professors, medical doctors, and researchers. Serious, educated, accomplished people. Min walked to the head of the table and sat down sideways. Completely relaxed. Almost casual. Like he was waiting for a bus. He pointed at the elderly man and said, "Bring it to me." The old man disappeared and came back carrying what I can only describe as an ancient manuscript. Not a book you would find in a library. Something that looked older than anything I had ever seen. The kind of thing you would expect to see behind glass in a museum exhibit on ancient East Asian civilizations. Min flipped through it in seconds. Just a few seconds. Then he tossed it aside and said flatly, "There is nothing here for me." He stood up, turned to my grandmother, and said sweetly, "Sorry about the detour, ma'am. How about a walk?" Quote. And they strolled out together into the mountain air. While my uncle and I just sat there completely stunned. Later, we asked the elderly man who Min was to him. What he told us stopped us cold. He said he was an orphan. And when he was a young boy with no family, no home, and no future, a monk took him in. That monk cared for him, taught him, and raised him. And he said, "The face of that monk who raised me is the exact same face I saw walk through that door just now." He had not aged. Not a single year. The elderly man, we later discovered, was one of the founding figures of a Korean spiritual and physical practice called Jikkyol, or energy cultivation. Think of it as Korea's version of what Westerners know as Qigong or Qigong, the ancient Chinese practice of cultivating life energy through breath, movement, and meditation. Except this man had built an entire school of it from the ground up. He had hundreds of students, respected disciples, and academic followers. And he was calling Min his master. My uncle later looked into it and found historical references. Some people thought Min might be connected to a legendary figure from Korean history named Jong Ryum, also known as Bukchang, a scholar and mystic from the Joseon dynasty who reportedly achieved a kind of physical transcendence. Others said maybe he was Kim Sat-gat, a wandering poet and sage who became a kind of folk legend in Korea. Someone who walked away from everything and vanished into the mountains. My uncle is not sure which, if either, but he says the power was undeniable. Now let me share a few more incidents, because this story does not end at that hermitage. My uncle's coffee shop became a kind of unofficial gathering place for Min and a group of my uncle's friends. One of those friends was a serious horse racing gambler. My uncle knew him well and they were close. One day this friend came in talking about how much money he had been losing at the track. Someone joked, "Hey, if Min can do all these things, why not take him to the races and let him pick the winners?" Quote. Min heard this and did not laugh. He looked at the gambler and said quietly, "I have one thing to say to you. If you keep going to those races, you will die alone, away from home, and away from everyone who loves you. That is your fate if you stay on this path. But if you trust me and walk away from gambling today, you will live a genuinely happy life. Please, listen to me, stop going." The friend laughed it off. He thought Min was being dramatic. He kept pushing and joking. "Come on, just pick me a few winners. Just this once." Min said nothing more. Then Min reached into his backpack, took out a bottle of water, and handed it to the gambler. "Drink this," he said. The man drank it. On the way to the racetrack afterward, he felt like someone was following him. That creeping sensation you get on the back of your neck when you sense eyes on you but turn around, and no one is there. He shook it off and went anyway. That same afternoon, my uncle got a phone call from the gambler's girlfriend. She was at Severance Hospital, which is one of the top medical centers in Seoul. She said the gambler had collapsed. He was conscious, his eyes were moving, but his entire body was paralyzed. Total paralysis. The doctors ran every test they had and found absolutely nothing wrong with him. Neurologically clean. Physically healthy on paper. They told the girlfriend he was faking it. My uncle and Min went to the hospital together. They walked into the room and found him lying flat, eyes darting around the room, completely unable to move. Min walked to his bedside, put a hand on his shoulder, and said simply, "This is what happens when you ignore a warning." Then he pressed down gently on the man's shoulder. The gambler sat up immediately. Full mobility restored. Just like that. There are a couple more things I want to tell you because they are honestly the hardest to believe. Even for me. One evening, a group of us was sitting around watching television. This was during the period when Uri Geller, the Israeli illusionist known for apparently bending spoons with his mind, was all over Korean TV. It was a big cultural moment. Everyone was fascinated and debating whether it was real. Min watched for a moment, then sort of smirked and said, "Why would anyone waste power on that?" Quote. Then he held up his hand and used his finger to write something in the air. And the characters, actual written characters, appeared in the space in front of him. Hanging there, glowing faintly, for a few seconds, and then gone. Like skywriting, but made of light, inside a room. Everyone saw it. Then he turned to look at an old kerosene heater in the corner. It was not lit. He focused on it hard, visibly concentrating, and the flame clicked on by itself. No match, no lighter. Just his gaze. And then there was the time at the river. We were all out together. My uncle, my little brother, some of the friends, and Min, at a mountain stream outside the city. Streams like this are a popular summer hangout in Korea. People wade, swim, barbecue on the rocky banks. The stream we were at was maybe 30 feet wide with clear, fast-moving water. Someone called out to Min from the opposite bank. And Min walked across. Not around, not through a shallow crossing. Across the surface. His feet landing on the water like it was packed dirt. Not sinking, not splashing, just walking. Steady and calm, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My uncle, my little brother, the friends, all of us standing right there. Saw it happen. I also need to tell you about one night inside the coffee shop. It was after midnight. My uncle and Min had turned off most of the lights and lit a single candle. They were deep in a spiritual practice rooted in something called Cheon Bu Jeong, which translates roughly to the scripture of heavenly code. It is one of the oldest surviving texts in Korean spiritual tradition, connected to the ancient myths surrounding Dangun, the legendary founder of the first Korean kingdom. Think of it as Korea's version of a sacred text. Something like the I Ching meets Genesis. Specific to Korean cosmological belief. Min had told my uncle that reciting this text was one of the most powerful spiritual disciplines a person could undertake. So they had been chanting it for hours. At some point, my uncle needed to use the bathroom. He stood up, turned around, and then stopped. He could see himself. Still sitting there, cross-legged, eyes closed, chanting. And Min was also still sitting there. Both of them seated, both still chanting. While my uncle was also standing 3 feet away watching them. He had separated from his own body. Like a waking out of body experience. And as he stood there staring at the 2 seated figures, Min, the seated version, slowly opened his eyes, looked directly at the standing version of my uncle, and smiled. During that same era, they took a week-long trip together to Jiri Mountain, which is the largest mountain range on the Korean mainland, and one of the most spiritually significant places in the country. Think of it as Korea's equivalent of a sacred wilderness. The kind of place where mystics and monks have gone for 1,000 years to seek deeper understanding. My uncle and Min spent 7 days meditating together in a cave on that mountain. At least, that is what it felt like to my uncle. He experienced 7 full days, night and day, inside that cave. But when he came back to himself, only a few dozen minutes had passed in real time. On separate cave retreats, my uncle noticed something else. He would perform a 30-day ceremonial vigil, which in Korean folk tradition involves keeping incense burning and maintaining a kind of continuous spiritual offering. Candles, offerings, prayers, without interruption. My uncle's own candles kept going out. He needed food and water and rest like any normal person. But Min's candle burned continuously. The entire time. Without melting down. Without shortening. Without ever going out. And Min himself did not eat, did not drink, and barely slept for the entire period. When the time finally came for Min to move on, he sat with my uncle and said some things that my uncle has been thinking about ever since. He made several predictions. Some have already come true. Some are still pending. The ones that already came true. He told my uncle exactly when my grandfather would die. He spoke about my little brother, who is no longer living. He also had things to say about my father. There was one prediction, though, that stuck in my uncle's mind more than any other. Min told him that before everything reached its conclusion, a tower taller and larger than any other structure in the world would be built in Korea, on a footprint bigger than the entire Jamsil Olympic Stadium complex. And that when that tower rose, all the major religions of Korea would begin moving toward unification. And things as we know them would change fundamentally. Years later, when the Lot World Tower was built in Seoul, my uncle got chills. It is currently the 5th tallest building in the world, rising from the heart of Jamsil, right next to the Olympic grounds. Min had called it a tower, which makes sense, since Min used ancient vocabulary. But whether or not the Lot Tower is specifically what Min meant, my uncle says the resemblance is difficult to dismiss. There was also a personal prophecy. Min told my uncle that my father had the potential to achieve in 3 years of study under Min what most spiritual practitioners spend an entire lifetime failing to reach. He invited my father to come with him. My father thought it sounded absurd and politely declined. But here is the thing. My father is currently living alone in the wilderness near a famous lake in the Korean mountains. No electricity. No internet. He has been out there for close to 5 years now. There are some complicated things going on with that situation that I am not ready to talk about yet. But I mention it because it feels related. The last thing Min said before he disappeared from my uncle's life was this. My uncle asked, "When will I see you again?" Quote. And Min said, very simply, "When you turn 70. We will meet again then." And then he was gone. My uncle missed him terribly. When I was in high school, he decided to go looking for Min in the Jiri mountain area, where they had spent so much time together. He knew of a certain settlement in the foothills where a community of specialized monks lived. These were practitioners skilled in what we might call spiritual warfare or exorcism, driving out harmful energies and restoring balance to troubled places and people. My uncle figured if anyone would know Min's whereabouts, it would be someone from that community. He found them. He explained who he was looking for. The most senior nun in the community came to speak with him. She listened, and then she shook her head gently and said, "Do not search for him. That man could be a stone by now. He could be wind. He could be a cloud. There is no way to know what form he has taken. When the time comes, you will see him again. You will not need to look." And that is where the story stands. This is not a closed chapter. My uncle is still alive. He is not yet 70. So if Min keeps his word, the ending of this story has not happened yet. I honestly do not know what to make of all of it. I was there for some of it as a child. I saw what I saw. And my uncle, my grandmother, and several other living witnesses all tell the same story. All I can tell you is, whatever that man was, he was not like anyone I have met before or since. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you have a story of your own, please reach out. And remember to subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Good night.